Hello and welcome to We Thought About Games, the podcast where games are looked at historically, fondly, and critically. Tonight we're going to look at Phantasy Star Online. With me today are NextTime.
Hello.
Miijhal.
Hi!
And Kirbysuperstar.
Hello.
Alright, so, Kirby, you want to start us off with the history of Phantasy Star Online?
Sure. So, the chairman of Sega for quite a while was a man named Isao Okawa, who really just loved video games and kind of kept bankrolling Sega through years and years of really bad decisions, like the 32X and Saturn, all sorts of things like that. I don't know if he played a lot of games, but he really did like them, and when the Dreamcast was sort of coming out, it was his idea to have a modem in it, because he thought, playing games online and across the world is probably going to be a pretty big and important thing in the future.
Which is correct.
Yeah. That wasn't without precedent, because, especially in the US, a lot of people on PCs were playing things like Mugs and Ultima Online and stuff. But in Japan, PC games never really caught on as much, and Japanese dial-up ISP was still charging by the minute, even well into the early 2000s. So he paid out of his own pocket for every Japanese Dreamcast to come with a free year of dial-up access in order to get the ball rolling throughout the country. And most of the development teams at Sega agreed with his idea that online games would be really good, but they kind of had their own projects and nobody wanted to, put their hand up and say, yeah, we'll work on that. Yuji Naka's Sonic team had just finished wrapping up Sonic Adventure 1, so their team was split into three, one which focused on pushing Dreamcast graphics as far as they could, a smaller one that worked on little projects like Choo Choo Rocket, and probably Sega Swirl, and one more to sort of work around the idea of an online cooperative game. And very early on they decided that it was going to be sci-fi oriented, and they internally called it the Third World. Whatever reason. The art director at the time was Satoshi Sakai, who still works at Sega now, working on Phantasy Star Online 2. He drew a picture of a dragon and showed it to Yuji Naka, said that, maybe mixing in some fantasy to the sci-fi would be pretty neat. They thought about it and realized, oh, you know what, we have an RPG series that did just that and we kind of aren't doing anything with. So they decided to make it a new Phantasy Star game of sorts. At the time, Naka was also quite a big fan of Diablo. She really enjoyed, going out and getting random loot and things like that, but he apparently wasn't much of a fan of the visuals, and sort of set the team a goal to make their game like that, but look a lot better. And have more personality, I suppose. Anyway, so they ended up making the game, and it came out and sort of just met their sales expectations, not too much over what they thought it was going to do. Despite critical acclaim, which turned out to be somewhat of a blessing, as their internal server infrastructure actually couldn't handle many more people, and if a lot more people were playing it, then it would have actually just fallen over and died. Which is kind of a trend that follows Sega to this day. Sadly, though, during production, Isao Okawa became quite ill and passed away from heart failure just 3 days before it won the 5th annual Japan Game Award from Japan's Ministry of Trade, Economics and Industry. That was 2001, I think, so it was probably a year and a half after the Dreamcast came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the story premise you get when you start up the game is just presented with some really nice mood-setting music for a sort of space opera type setting. Is that to escape from their planet ravaged by war, which some background material states the planet's called Coral, which I had no idea of when I played it.
Real talk,
the
I didn't
Dreamcast.
even know that the planet had a name until like maybe a month ago.
I just found out when I decided to look up the premise on the wiki, so they don't really tell you in the game. They just say to escape from the planet ravaged by the war.
They could have, but it's just probably buried on somewhere.
Yeah. But to escape, a project is put forth called the Pioneer Project, where they launch one ship to find a habitable home planet, which will contain most of the military and scientific personnel, and then one containing the civilian population and the remaining military and scientific personnel. The first ship, Pioneer 1, arrives at the planet Miijhal and sets up shop there, and gives Pioneer 2 the go-ahead to join them. As soon as Pioneer 2 arrives and sets up a communication link, a giant explosion rocks the central dome structure that Pioneer 1 had set up, and they lose all communication. So, you as a member of the Hunters Guild has to cooperate with the government and the guild, and, just do your own thing, and find out what happened. Alright, so next time, how does it play?
As Kirby mentioned early on, they were trying to kind of go for like a Diablo-y feel, where you team up with some friends and then you go into an instance type of dungeon and murder things, get random loot, get to the end and kill a big bad thing. Though, where Diablo was kind of based around the classic PC RPG type gameplay of that was kind of like
the left
RTS
mouse button.
Yeah, kind of RTS-y, but you just click on things and just click on things to death, until they die, you die, or you actually die. They took it in a different direction by making it more action-oriented, where you move the character around, you can manually evade attacks by getting out of the way, then come back and do some counterattacks, and they probably also disliked the whole left click until something expires, implementing a little combo system where if you're just mashing the attack button like I did for like a good solid month or two when I started playing, you're just going to swing your weapon, and then you just kind of don't swing it anymore. You just swing it, and then you just stand there awkwardly and take a hit.
Yeah.
But if you time your button presses instead, like at the very end of the first attack's animation or something, you'll continue a combo up to like 3 hits.
Yeah, 3 inputs and however many hits the weapons do.
I just remember the first time, like, seeing another player do more than one attack in succession. I was like, what sorcery is this?
Oh man, my brother and I just figured it out because we were trying to attack quickly and did a second hit. And that was impossible for us to get for the longest time, because if you press the button too soon, you won't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, if you mispress, so you actually have to be mindful of that the whole
Like, it was
time
probably easier to do on guns, because those had short attack animations, so you could probably mash on those and not even and get the 3 hits in and not really notice.
Hmm.
Maybe you did, I sure didn't.
At least for maybe like rifles or pistols. Shotguns were definitely too slow.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But when you make your character, you actually choose from, in the Dreamcast version, there's 3 races and 3 character classes and 3 pre-combined archetypes for each. So there's hunters who focus on close-range weaponry, rangers who focus on guns, and forces who focus on magic. And
Photon
the 3 races...
magic.
Yes. And the 3 races are humans, newmen, and androids. And androids can't use magic, so they're never part of spellcasting classes. And I guess they decided that newmen rangers wouldn't be any different from humans or androids, so they're not included in that one. They all have different specializations. There's some weapons that you require certain stats to equip certain weapons, but also some weapon types just can only be equipped by certain classes. So swords, which hit multiple enemies, can only be used by hunters. Long-range rifles can only be used by rangers. And the force weapons aren't really that great to use, but only they can use those.
Yeah, I think a lot of them offered like defensive bonuses.
Yeah,
like,
they raise your
evasion, or I think, I think rods were evasion, and canes were defense.
Yeah, and they increase your magic casting power, and they have different animations, so they're not useless, but you're not missing out as the other classes by not being able to use them.
Yeah. Canes were literally just the saber animations again, just on a different weapon type.
And have unappealing names like cane and stick.
Then you get club.
Oh, the club is the best one.
Then, like, later on you would start finding a few other types. Yeah, like shotguns and wands later on. Which, like, wands were more... Like, wands just reused the double saber animation. I think they were actually boosted your magic... They, like, directly boosted your magic attack more than the others, but provided little to nothing else.
Yeah. There's, like, an interesting mix of weapons. You start the game off, you'll only find and be able to buy basic weapons like sabers, which only hit one enemy in their close range, and handguns, which have about average range. Pretty weak bullets. But later on you'll start finding new types of weapons, like shots, which are multi-hit weapons for rangers, and partisans, which are like long, like spear-type weapons for hitting crowds. But yeah, and once you get up into the higher difficulties is when you start getting the higher quality levels of the items. Like, there's average items, and they each have different colors. So, like, a saber is green, but the Buster, which is the third tier one, is purple, and stuff like that. And then you'll also start finding rare weapons, which on the Dreamcast version just sort of glow between the two photon colors, which is not very exciting. And then on the GameCube versions and up, they have unique appearances. And there are some weapon types which are only rare weapons. There's no average version, so double sabers, which are... a lot of people, when they saw it, brought up Darth Maul from Star Wars Episode 1. But this has nothing embarrassing or racist attached to it, so there's that. And speaking of which, actually, with the character creator... you can make a decent range of appearances for people, mostly even though the colors are preset, because you can set the proportions yourself, which is actually pretty nice. You can make someone who's tiny and has a giant sword, because the weapons don't change size depending on who's using that.
Yeah, that was always fun.
Yep.
Me, would you like to discuss the atmosphere of the game?
Oh, hell yes. The big thing for me was just the way they combined the art style, which was kind of not quite as anime as it was in, like, Phantasy Star Universe or the like. It was...
Or the original, earlier Phantasy Star games, which had anime cutscenes.
Yeah, instead of doing cutscenes, they would have little data discs you could read, and that they kind of fit that into the general atmosphere. But like, once you get into the forest, you're in this like really lush, beautiful forest. There's serene music playing in the background. You get the little glowing discs and little particle effects everywhere that kind of make it a really relaxing and beautiful yet mysterious setting. The way it uses the music to kind of transition you from walking around in the calm, mysterious exploration to combat is really interesting.
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of fade points on the soundtrack.
Yep.
Which you can see if you open up the Blueburst, the most recent PC version's audio files. They have sort of a metadata which has transition points in it, so it will transition between exploration and fighting, but it's always pretty smooth.
Yep. There's just a lot of little details like that. Also, just the general pace of the gameplay leads itself to the kind of mysterious setting it's going for. Like, it's not a very fast game, even though it definitely has action elements. It's very slow paced. You're kind of just waltzing around in the dungeons. There's also a lot of like variety in the designs of the areas and the way that, like in the volcano stages, you start off in like a typical volcano level that just lava and tunnel, like rock walls and things like that.
Igneous platforms.
Yeah. And then you get to the second layer and suddenly you're in this like really beautiful set of caves where there's like water pouring down from the sides. You have beautiful waterfalls with lush flowers and butterflies and shit. And it, once you get to the third area, it transitions again into like an underground facility.
Yeah, with sort of weird organic growths.
Yep. And just the way it used all of that together, it gives a really... It keeps it from getting monotonous, and it also helps give it a lot of life at the same time.
Yeah. And there's sort of... They mostly do this in the forest, but I mean, a lot of games do this with the first area having nicer production values, I suppose, but like there's little brooks, and if you walk near them, like when it's quiet, you can actually hear the water flowing, which is a totally unnecessary touch for what's like a dungeon crawler loot-based game, but they put it in there.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
And I mean,
especially for 2001, like that's its competition in this regard.
The attention to detail they had with all the little effects that were going on. There's also, like, right before you get to Dark Falls, you're in that, like, lush green ruins with a single monolith, and, like, soft piano music is playing in the background. And then when you walk up to the monument, all the flowers wilt away, and it just becomes, like, this horrible pit.
I think one of the better things about that track is that if you stop and listen to it, it actually begins to degrade a little bit.
Yeah, like the piano is very serene, and like the environmental effects are closer to what you hear in the forest. But if you wait, like a really sort of dark, like minor key string part starts. I'll put it under this section. So
there's also like some birds that are chirping, but then they start sounding more like actual like audiophile type things going on with it. It could have been unintentional, but still it adds to it.
But it's one of those things where so much is done intentionally and intelligently that you give them that credit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It has weird sort of horror-ish elements, both in terms of the story and the setting. Like the notes you read, which are left behind by like an ace hunter from Pioneer 1.
One of the founders of the Hunters Guild, apparently.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like they start off with like advice for the enemies in the area, but the discoveries go from like, oh, something's wrong, like things are different, something's happened, to something strange is happening, to we've discovered something horrible and there's no turning back.
Then it transitions into like her talking about how she's basically being possessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, like even as early as the forest, you get a lot of people saying, "Yo, wasn't there some sort of huge, gigantic explosion? How come there's like no trace of an explosion here at all, aside from there being absolutely nobody here, except for native creatures?"
Yeah, which if you look at the logs or Rico being confused that these things were peaceful, which is weird when you look at some of them because they just look like killing machines.
Yeah,
but. You know, so like these things were friendly or peaceful, you know, they didn't bother people unless we bothered them. But now they're aggressive. They come for us as soon as they see us.
When you start seeing the little smaller monoliths around and there's little notes next to them saying, oh, this thing is really weird and it's kind of warm for some reason, I don't know.
Yeah. And you find out later what they're for, but that note doesn't even understand really what they're for, just how you activate them. Like, so it's a gameplay thing at that point. And then later you realize that, that's also a huge mistake.
There are still elements of people saying there's something definitely wrong here, even early on.
And even just as a sort of small touch, I mean, when you attack enemies, there's, like, blood comes out, and they leave blood puddles behind when they die, which is more violent than usual for a game with that kind of presentation at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But speaking of which, the sound design in this game is probably what's dated the least, because it's really good. It's bizarre to say this multiplayer online action RPG from 2001 gets you a lot of mileage out of your subwoofer. But it totally does. Like, just every time a hit connects, which we'll discuss when it doesn't later, but every time it does, it's like a really bassy noise that undercuts every single attacking team. Even stuff that seems like it would be light. Like, like we said, the canes and stuff are really weirdly tiny weapons, but they actually have a pretty satisfying hit effect compared to even modern games still get this wrong.
Yeah.
Also, the monster effects are very... The first basic enemy you meet is kind of sounds like the imps from Doom.
Yes.
But otherwise, everything else is pretty interesting and original.
Or, hearing one of the Build-A-Bears dropping behind you and letting out a little roar. Like, even if you can't see it, you know it's there, and you know, okay, I have to react to this really quickly, or it's gonna, clean my clock.
Yeah, and the screen shakes.
And I think even when they they spawn in, they kind of jump in and they make a little thump noise or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So even if they are behind you, you're like, shit.
Yeah.
When the enemies appear, it's very... Some of them, I mean, they pop up out of the ground sometimes for no reason, but other ones, like the Rag Rappies, which you could argue are the mascot of the game, just sort of
Like
fall from the sky.
That buries underground. They really like doing that.
They do.
Yeah. It was kind of a convenient way to transition enemies in and out.
Yeah, well, I mean, in each room, like, if you could only fight as many enemies are there already, it would be much quicker.
Yeah.
And the ways that the early enemies come in, like, the Hilda-Bears jump in and that can be harmful, and they can start attacking immediately.
I like the Mothverts being lured in by their moth gnats that they spawn.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
you just hear that buzzing.
Yeah.
I think what happens to them on hard mode is brilliant, but again, we'll get to that.
Later.
Yeah, but then in later sections, in the caves, a lot of stuff like warps in Star Trek style, which is very strange.
Yeah.
There's no real explanation for that at all. I mean, even less so than everything else. But
it kind of makes sense for the robots and some of the A-beasts, but
yeah,
a lot of the stuff, it really doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Again, this has interesting story elements. It's not a story-driven game. You're not going to play this for the story, but what they did with it is nice, considering they didn't have to.
Yeah. The story is basically there to give you motivation, and at the same time, it does help give the setting, makes you feel closer to the setting, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite ways an enemy appears, a standard enemy, is in the mines, the Sinnoh-Beats, which are pretty much robot ninjas. They drop down from the ceiling, and if you can see them when they spawn in, they're just sort of clinging by their feet to the ceiling with their arms crossed. Then they land, and then they jump at you and totally annihilate you. But my favorite is in the ruins. There's an enemy called a Chaos Bringer, and the first room you're probably going to see them in is the Midway room in Ruins 2, which is a super long stretch.
Yeah.
With some side portions you can't access until you flip some switches. So, you see some enemies, it's fine, and then something just rushes at you, and it's a centaur with a sword arm.
A gun
And
sword
it wrecks
arm.
you, because Chaos Bringers were hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they're really tough.
Oh man, I mean, we'll get later on. They start getting even more assholey.
Yeah. But just in terms of atmosphere and the bosses, the first one is a dragon, which I remember when my brother and I found it because we didn't realize the boss teleporter. In retrospect, it's super obvious. It's a giant teleporter that says, "Are you sure you want to do this?"
Are you sure?
But yeah, so the first boss is a dragon, which, like, probably the most interesting thing it does is halfway through the fight, it'll start tunneling underground, which can be pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Unless you figure it out. But then the other bosses afterwards, the second boss is like a giant tunnel sewer worm.
My favorite.
Yeah, the music for that boss is perfect.
Yes.
They used it in the trailer for version 2 of Phantasy Star Online because it's probably one of the more iconic pieces. The other boss music is okay by comparison. And that fight, first of all, it's a giant worm that's shooting like exploding mind spores and stuff at you. And it has a skull face.
Yeah, it's like a skull mask.
Well, that's the thing, you don't know it's a mask really, until you break it off, and it has a gross worm face underneath it. It's just like, whoa, what is going on? And then also, probably before that point, partway through the fight, it turns the lights out.
And starts, bouncing across the ceiling, dropping rocks on you.
Firing lasers at you. Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, that fight can go on for a while. Like, that's definitely one of the first fights that risks that. Mm-hmm. But just the way it plays out is really fantastic the first time.
It's by far my favorite boss in the game. Even from the upgraded versions.
Yeah, the future games would try to recreate the fight, but they never really recaptured horror-ish elements of the initial fight.
And even episode 2 of the original Phantasy Star Online tries to recapture this fight. I mean, they make it more hectic, but it has much less personality, and it feels very
cute.
Yeah.
Makes those little ray mice things that squeak around.
Yeah.
Adorable.
You've always missed the paralyzed one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you run parallel, you'll miss all of them. Pro tip.
Oh.
But yeah. And for the third section, the mines, I mean, even before we discuss the boss, the forest and the caves have set up a sort of enemy pattern where there's a standard enemy with sort of 3 levels of difficulty, 3 different forms that get progressively bigger, and then a bunch of different side interesting enemies. Then you get to the mines, and the default enemy are robots that if you hit them, they fall down. They don't get stunned, they actually fall to the floor and then get back up. And if you stay far away from them, they shoot you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, it completely threw me off the first time I played. It's so different, and the music itself is obviously more electronic sounding.
Yep.
And then the only evolution of them is actually a weird, zombie robot thing.
Oh yeah, I really like that enemy just because it makes it seem like you can't actually kill them through, attacking them over and over again because they just have so much health.
Yeah, you knock them down and, they get knocked to the floor and they fall apart, which is what the regular robot enemies do once you've done the killing blow to them. But then they just sort of change, they become sort of more broken looking, and you see little strings of electricity between their limbs, and they hook parts of themselves back together and get back up.
Yep.
And make really weird, really distorted, messed up robot sounds compared to the normal ones. And the trick to destroying them is they have a controller switch, but until you figure that out, it's just what the hell is going on?
I think you have to attack them once or twice and then the switch falls down.
Yeah, you have to kill one and then the switch will appear, unless you can see the switch, and then if you have a gun, you can just blow it up. Mm-hmm. One of the many ways in which guns are much better than other weapons in this game for the most part. We're going to have a time once we get to the gameplay section.
Our in-depth.
Yeah, you can actually also kill them if you just keep repeatedly killing them, which I guess is considerate if you're that stubborn.
And it was.
Yeah, you kill them 8 times, I think, or 5 or 8 times, and then they just explode.
I want to say 8 just because,
they want to punish you that hard for not finding the one switch.
Yeah, perfect.
You could have probably already seen it by now.
Yeah, I think I did that once when I found an instant kill weapon, just because I thought it was really funny, And especially once they come back to life, they're resistance to certain like instant kills and stuff like that gets way lower. But that's a nice change. And then the boss of the mines, like at first it's just like a face and computer screens, which is like that fight is pretty good. It's decently like skill based, so you're not gonna really get hit if you can just keep up with the pace of the fight. And then the second part, I also like this musical transition because it becomes this like big doom march kind of, and then you're fighting something that is sort of keeps spinning to face you, and it fires all of its attacks just cause you to panic. It fires missiles that chase you. It fires an energy ball thing that if it captures you, you can't do anything, and its eye like glows up more and more and more until it hits you with a super powerful attack. If you play with someone, they can break you out of it. If you're not, then you just get to face it. And its most upsetting attack is where it... Well, that one's probably the most upsetting, but the one it does the most is it'll trace you with the laser, and then a panel on it opens up and charges up, and then pillars from the ceiling try to smash you. And that goes on for a little while, too. Like, if you're just like, alright, I dodged the pillar. Oh, here's another one. Here's another one. It never stops.
Oh, yeah. It just keeps trying to smash you for, like, a good 10 seconds.
Yeah. Like, when it stops to heal itself, that's almost a relief, because it's not attacking you finally. Once you beat that fight, instead of going back to Pioneer 2, I'm not sure how true this is on later versions. I like the PC versions and stuff, because I haven't played the official release. But instead of going back, you enter this little hallway that's got the ruins exploration music, and it's a little chunk of the ruins, and it's got a sealed door, and that's where you learn the incantation that you're supposed to use on the pillars to open it. So you have to go back through the areas again, which, depending on how you feel about that and how overpowered you are, it's good or bad, but you find the pillars and activate them, and then you have to go back through this section, beat the boss again, and then you can go through the door and you've unlocked the ruins.
I want to say, unless it required you to go back the first time, you could theoretically find the pillars on your first run through.
That's right. Yeah, in the Dreamcast version, you can't activate the pillars until you see the message in this lead-up section.
Okay.
Yeah, then you can activate them, and then you can go to the
I think I remember on Xbox you could just touch it anyways. Like, what is the sound? I'll touch it. Okay.
Yeah, which, I mean, is fine. Narratively, it's a little weaker, but I can understand the gameplay concession.
Yeah, because having to go back, there's all the areas. Like, forest and the mines are okay, but having to go through caves again is the worst.
Yeah, the forest and mines are 2 sections. The caves is 3.
Everybody hates caves.
I love Derole, but I cannot stand the caves.
Yeah, it has those nice aesthetic changes, but like those are necessary. Forest 2 compared to Forest 1, which the area names are kind of bland in Episode 1. But Forest 2, like it starts raining, it's a little more overcast. Forest, but Caves, has those area transitions. Mines 2, it looks different, like it's a little more closed in and darker.
And it's kind of more damaged and worn down.
Yeah, that's true. And it's closer to the damage, so that's kind of interesting. But it's also not incredibly different, but the area itself is so strong to play that it works out. Ruins, they get progressively more sort of organic over time. That's about it, aesthetically speaking. I mean, the organic stuff gets kind of gross and unsettling, but that's it. And that's also 3 sections, and it's the most difficult, so...
Yeah,
people don't mind, people just hate caves, but a lot of people are kind of still like ruins anyway, just for the challenge and whatnot.
And the area music is really good.
Yeah.
Like, Ruins has a lot of really good design. Just, in general, they put different enemies on different levels in a way that it keeps it constantly evolving as you get further down.
That's true.
And they do this with other levels, but it feels more so in Ruins. And just, there's some really strong environmental design going around there, like the waterfall you can go across. That
Yeah.
was always one of my favorite rooms.
Yeah. Once you hit the caves, every area has a midpoint room. Caves 1 is just a little longer than usual. It's a little more open on the sides. Caves 2 has the waterfall room, which is really pretty striking.
Caves 3 is more, I think, more split into two types of rooms.
Yeah. That's true.
Like, you have the kind of more greenery rooms that have have like a more bluish feel to them. Then you have like the more rocky rooms that have. Oh wait, I think Caves 3 does have a center point room. It's roughly shaped, kind of like the Caves 2 midpoint room, but it's a bit smaller and doesn't have the waterfalls or anything.
Yeah, it has, like, you go from the kind of technological feel of it to just an area with dirt and grass on the ground and a lot of brighter colors.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. It's just
that room is typically, I think, a number of the setups for Caves 3 have that room start in darkness.
Yeah, that's another touch this game does, is that some rooms you walk into and the lights are out when you go in, so if something glows, like enemy attacks or sometimes parts of enemies, you can see that, but you have to find the light switch to turn it on, which is not super difficult, and I mean, if you look at the minimap, you can see where the enemies are, but it's a nice bit of atmosphere, and sometimes you want to...
Like, the button glows too, but they often also put the button underneath some boxes or something.
Yeah, or behind a little door barrier.
Or, you can go back and stand in the doorway, and as soon as the game thinks you've moved into the other room, then it lights the room back up again.
Yeah. But again, you can't attack things from outside the room, so you still have to deal with it.
Well, I believe you can cast text outside of doors?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, without lock-ons, though, it's it's a bit dicey.
Hilda bears are one of the few enemies that can actually attack you outside of the room, just because they have the Foy.
Breath. Yeah. Also, I mean, as we're going through the areas, the boss arena for the dragon is just under the dome. It's just a cave dome. It's alright. It's a circle. And then Darrell you fight on, because it's in a sewer, you're on a raft. Darrell is, on all sides of you and jumping over the raft and stuff. Okay, and then the mines, the midway room, it's really small and it's unassuming, but the first enemy that shows up is a Sinnoh, which is the ninja, so that's the highlight of that room.
Oh, yeah. Mines 2 has the zigzag room.
Yeah, that one it's an interesting encounter setup because they have the reviving robots at the beginning, but the switch to kill them all is at the end, and you have to zigzag across and more enemies spawn as you go through. So that was really effective.
And then, like, once you get into the second half, once you get past that room, is when they start throwing brands at you.
Oh yeah, that weapon. But the boss arena, like I said, the first boss is just you're surrounded by a bunch of monitors, and there's some pillars, and then the blown up version of that room is again an oval, but instead of the dragon where it chases you around there, the boss is the center point of the room, and there's not much room outside of that. And then with the ruins, the first halfway room?
I think it's the waterfall.
Right, yeah, that's right. That one's pretty interesting, because there's just a huge crater there, and once you kill all the enemies, you can read a note. It says, like, oh, this seems like where the blast that destroyed the dome surged up from, which is really an interesting detail. And you can, if you see on the map that you can go beyond it, you can go through a little part of the waterfall and find an area with some extra nice treasures. It's small, but it's a nice detail. And if enemies chase you into there, then you're pretty boxed in, so that was stupid. Why didn't you kill the enemies first? It's also a funny place to abandon your teammates if they don't know about the waterfall, because they won't know where you are. And then Ruins 2 has the very long room where you first fight a Chaos Bringer, that's pretty interesting, mostly just because it's such a big space to work with, and with the faster enemies, it's more interesting there. And then Ruins 3, there is a midway room, but the most interesting one is actually the one right before the boss teleporter. So there's a very long hallway leading up to it, and then it's a pretty wide room split down the middle with a little structure and enemies spawn on either side. Once you kill enough, you'll access there'll be one treasure room you can go into, with like probably the best stuff you're going to find in that game in terms of regular item drops. And then you go out and there'll be more enemies. You kill those and you get to the second treasure room, and then it's the boss teleporter. And we discussed the boss arena, which is that really grassy area, which I guess if you go by the soundtrack is the place nearest to heaven.
Yep.
Which, we discussed the aesthetics of that. Really nice, but secretly disturbing. And you go up to the monolith, and the ground turns into screaming faces. And you get assaulted by a ton of these tiny, just razor things. And you can only kill some of them. If they bump into you, which unlike any other enemy, if they bump into you, you get hurt. So that's pretty stressful. And then you kill them, and then the monolith explodes, and the boss appears, and he's huge.
Yeah. I really love the design of Dark Falls. It's like just so many layers of faces and so many little details there. You can even see Rico in it.
Yeah, in the chest. That's what happened to her, by the way. She unlocked the hidden door to destruction and left a note behind saying, "We're all doomed. I guess I'll do my best," and then she ends up as a avatar of the Dark God. That battle, the first form, like this, he's got a base which is like these 3 heads, which spit out more of those razor enemies. They're called Dark Ones, but whatever. You never see it again. It spits out that. He casts an attack which just rains lasers down from the heavens on you. You beat that form, and the bottom half goes away, and then he switches to a form where his bottom half is just an orb and he floats around. It's different, but it's not that much more interesting. And on normal difficulty, you kill the boss here, you see Rico's iconic red ring drop, and that's it. If you play on hard and above, it does something incredible where you kill the second form, and then a crazy angelic form ascends out of it, and you fight a third form on like an astral plane.
Yep.
And this new boss music kicks in, which is really good. Like, it's really intense, and it sets the mood perfectly. The boss is really awful if you're not a ranger, but the fight itself, the setup and the surprise alone is fantastic. I don't think other games do that nearly as well.
Also, if you try and fight that form alone, it will probably just kill you at some point.
Yeah.
Without you being able to do anything about it.
I kind of hate the hell out of the boss.
Yeah.
So, we kept mentioning how some enemies are easy if you're a ranger. That's because most enemies don't have ranged attacks.
And you can basically stun lock everything.
Yeah, it's a very safe way to play it. Though I think using the close range weapons is more fun for the most part.
They are a bit stronger, like how a number of setups would play in like challenge mode. You'd have like tech users who are like running on fluids, so they have to like they only get certain amounts uses out of their big attacks, so they can't really they can't spray everything, hose everything down in fire.
Yeah.
But the melee guys are going to deal good damage, but the ranged guys are still mostly going to want to try to keep things stun locked so that the hunter can take them down a bit better.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how later challenge mode levels play once more weapons start getting available.
Yeah.
But that's better guns get available, but
yeah. So I guess challenge mode is that one's really interesting, but I guess we should explain the game more in depth and how it works. And one thing which I have noticed from videos of people playing is there's sort of something about the system that's not very clear, especially for solo play. You know, where you just run up against an enemy and just sort of shove your face in them, they turn to attack you, there's nothing you can do. But actually there's a little thing which I have to imagine was put in on purpose. There's a delay after you do your first attack, and a delay after you do your third attack. There's less of one when you do your second attack, so what you do is 2 hits and then you break away and circle around. The way the combo system works is there's 3 inputs. Each input gets more accurate, and there's 3 types of input you can do. There's the normal attack, which is just base damage. Heavy attack, which has less accuracy and does more damage and pushes enemies back, which is very useful in some situations. And there's special attack, which weapons with a special property, it'll use that. That's the least accurate, but some of the effects are very interesting. In the early game, you can also do a lot more damage than you would with normal attacks. But the accuracy is probably the biggest sticking point if you want to play this game now.
Yeah, action games where you can miss, even though you're very clearly hitting them, is always kind of awful.
Yeah. Like, I tried to play Morrowind once I first got my Xbox, and I was like, I don't know if this mud crab is taking damage or not. And then I got killed by the mud crab.
Yeah. And this game, it's much more pronounced because all the things we said about the sound design and the graphics being very, much more intense, is it makes the failure state of getting hit feel much worse because you'll get hit, you'll get knocked back, you'll get taken out of your attack. If you get a critical hit, you'll fall to the ground.
Yeah, I think one of the getting hit noises kind of sounds like getting hit by a fish or something.
Yeah. Oh, and if you get hit with the Megan, which is the instant kill spell, you hear just like a guillotine slice noise.
Yeah, and that was more of a special death animation where your character just sort of stops in their tracks, kind of gets woozy, and just falls backward.
Yeah, I mean, actually that also happens if you die from very minor damage, which is very embarrassing.
Oh yeah, and that kind of starts to happen in some instances. Like if you go into Dark Falls with high defense, then you run up to the Darvents, and instead of the Darvents smacking you to the ground, they chainsaw you to death because you don't get the same amount of iframes as you do for getting knocked down like that.
The way the invincibility works in this game actually creates something interesting. I suppose it's actually a design failure. Like, I got stuck on De Relay, the cave worm boss, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to level up and come back, except at my level, if you got hit with his hardest to avoid attack, which is just like a barrage of energy bullets, you get knocked down, and then when you get up, you're invincible for a short time. I leveled up. I had enough defense that it didn't knock me down, so I got hit with all the bullets and I died. Which is why you should just learn to dodge things in this game instead of relying solely on... you need to level up, unfortunately. But it pays to learn how the enemies work.
Mm-hmm. And then you do Dark Falls and Dark Falls third form, and he just hits you regardless of what you're doing.
Oh, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. Dark Falls' final form is just riddled with HP checks. Just raw HP checks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when he flies over to you and just smacks you, I think that's just flat damage that's almost unmitigatable.
There's nothing you can do. It does a set amount of damage.
And then when he flies up and casts grants on everyone, you usually there's really no much of a use for light resistance.
Well, that's the light attack in the game. That's the only one.
There is another one, but...
They had that in episode 4, though.
No, I meant that the...
yeah, that's true. Yeah. But in the original version of Phantasy Star Online, which didn't have ultimate difficulty, that was the only attack it was for defending against. But yeah, in terms of the stats in this game, so you have resistance for every element, which it doesn't generally pay to build your character to be resistant to spells exclusively, because a lot of enemies do physical attacks anyway. So you have stats attack power, which... that determines how much damage you do and also what close range weapons you can equip. Attack accuracy, which is the hardest one to raise, even though you need to hit enemies, so they knew, and that was kind of a jerk move on Sonic Team's part. And you also need that to equip guns. There's mental strength, which is the magic damage and equip magic stuff stat. There's a defense stat, which that's what it is. Then there's also evasion, which is sort of what the enemies have to check for hitting you, but it's much easier for them to hit you than for you to hit them constantly.
Yep.
So, if you successfully, quote-unquote, evade an attack, your character blocks, which can actually be useful sometimes because it can cancel a lengthy attack animation and you can attack faster. But usually it'll lead to you, if you can block everything, just blocking a lot of attacks, and you need to just move out of the way so you can do anything.
Yeah, you just get stun locked. You're being stun locked even though you're not taking any damage.
Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, that's the only way you can get stun locked, by not taking damage. Oh, and there's a luck stat, which doesn't help you find items, which I thought for the longest time. That's actually the hardest stat to raise, but it doesn't matter as much. But luck only determines your chance of doing a critical hit and of receiving a critical hit. Which, again, is much easier for the enemies to do than for you to do it.
Yeah.
That one doesn't raise at all with leveling up or feeding your little mag, which is a robot buddy, which is pretty much just a bag of stats.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I think they were still kind of coming off. Everyone was still coming off of the Tamagotchi crazes. Of the
Yeah,
time.
pretty much.
Yeah, you can feed a mag items, and it has 4 statistics, which, when you equip it, they influence your stats. So you can raise its power, and you'll do more damage, and its defense will increase your health and defense. So raising a mag's dexterity stat is the fastest way to be able to gain more attack accuracy, and that's, again, the hardest thing to raise.
Yeah, I think where power and mind would give you 2, you need to raise dex twice to get 1.
Yeah, if you raise one
Yeah.
level, you get a half point of accuracy, which doesn't influence anything. But mags are... Yeah, so those are your stats, and then with the mag, it also has its own other stats besides the ones that improve your character. There's IQ, which is just sort of how smart, it kind of responds to situations with, so it can heal you, but if it has a low IQ, it's not going to know to do that. But Synchro actually also determines the percentage of it wanting to do that. It's how much it likes you, which if you die, Synchro goes down. When it heals you, or it can even bring you back from the dead, it can cast Revive on you. That lowers the Synchro rate, so you do have to keep feeding it, even if it's at a level you like.
Mm-hmm.
And also it has an ability called Photon Blast, which I thought was really awesome in 2001.
Yeah. It's kind of their answer to Final Fantasy summons, though thankfully not as long as those ended up getting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there aren't many cutscenes in the game, so...
Yeah.
And even then, with Photon Blasts, once you get to the ruins, you start to kind of take a double take at things if you begin to notice, hey, my Photon Blast kind of looks like a lot of the things here.
Yeah, they have the similar, neon trails and things.
Yeah, and they have different... they're mostly attacks. There's one that heals, and...
One that buffs.
Yeah.
The twins were pretty great.
That's the one most people
They
recommend.
just kind of... Well, just not even that. Even just them themselves, they're great. They're just kind of there, and then they kind of bonk their heads together the wrong way first. They fall over, oh, okay. Then they turn around and bonk the real way.
And this is,
apply the
again,
buff.
it's very quick, but they got a decent amount of character to them. Also, they give you an ability to... You can either give up your Photon Blast gauge, which you get by taking damage, and very little by doing damage. You can press a button to give it up to whoever's doing it, and it'll power theirs up. Or, if you all have it, you can perform yours immediately after someone does theirs, and it'll chain them together and increase their effects.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you do the twins, which is the buffing one, that's really powerful.
Yeah, it gets really strong if you have it as part of a 4-man chain.
Yeah. In terms of the delays in the combo timing, like I said, you can use the shortened delay after your second attack to break away, but what they really want you to do is work with other people, so you can just mitigate the delays in your own attacks with someone else taking up the slack for you.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of interested in how they managed to kind of incorporate the multiplayer into almost every aspect of the game. Because they did cutscenes in the form of those little capsules, there was no point in a multiplayer session where everyone is forced to stop except for the Photon Blast, where even then they can contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're reading the story, you can just sit there and read it, and everyone else can still get to play.
Yeah. And for this reason, even if you play in single player, you can't pause the game.
Mm-hmm.
So don't. If you need to get up to use the bathroom during the fight with Volopt, you're going to get stomped by giant pillars.
Yeah.
You just are.
I just imagine someone just in the middle of the final Dark Falls fight. Just like, get up. Oh, I better go. And then, like, Falls just like, no! And he flies over to him and smacks him dead.
That happened to me once when I was fighting Volopt. Form 2, actually. My parents told me to stop playing. It's like, can't you just pause it? And I couldn't explain to them that you couldn't. Because every other game I had, you could pause it.
Yeah.
But they really wanted to watch TV. And then they just channel surfed for a while because nothing was on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good job. One of my other favorite things, though, some of the weapon types, even rarer weapons, start breaking down barriers of rules that you thought were established early on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like,
Thread needle.
like, there's a rifle that fires like a shotgun, but you can use it as a hunter.
And it's as fast as a handgun.
Yeah, and people just... Yeah, I mean, that's like an extreme case of something that kind of broke everything
Mhm.
for a while. I don't know how that got handled.
If you have the spread needle, you will be very happy, and your team will be very upset with you. Because also the way this game works is, if you damage an enemy, then you'll get some experience when it dies. If you kill an enemy, you get a bigger share. And if you have a weapon like the spread needle, you'll kill everything before anyone can touch it, and then they'll get no experience points.
My favorite thing at one point, like when I was on one of the private servers, is that like I found a tier 4 rifle, like not the final one, not laser. I found a beam.
Yeah.
And it had it was as a special weapon, and I untech'd it, and it came out as a hell beam. And so I just got the fun idea of just making a new character with a decent enough dex mag that could equip it, and then just start at level 1 and join people's games and try to make a game of killing everything before they can get to it.
Yeah, that's one thing. The way the loot works in this game, it's not quite as randomized as Diablo or those other games. Weapons usually have just a single prefix to them, and some of them are pretty boring, like, oh, heat beam does a little fire damage, then fire, then flame, then
Burning.
Burning beam, burning saber. Yeah.
Well, to be fair though, like a burning laser or a burning what was the final handgun?
Ray gun.
Yeah, burning ray gun would be Cass's only way of damaging Dark Falls' third form when he gets all shiny and invincible to everything.
That's true.
Then Tempest for Episode 2's final boss.
Yeah. So yeah, there's elemental ones. There's ones that can drain an enemy's HP and give it to you.
There's ones that drain TP back for casting attacks.
Yeah. There's also ones that give you a share of the experience for killing an enemy, but it's just from damaging them.
There's also one that shoots money.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
There's 3 different types that aren't really in tiers, but they have they'll drain one of your things to pull off another more damaging attack. So one drains your health, another drains your technique points, another drains your money. So if you have a lot of money, you can do a lot of damage. And that's a commentary on modern society.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like the one that refills your TP on the extra attack. That special attack was actually on like the base double saber, and from what I recall, it was pretty much you need this if you want to play as like a Fomar.
Yeah. It's very useful because it also saves you. The health restoring ones can save you healing items, especially if you're an android and you can't use healing spells. And yeah, items to refill your magic. The cost can sometimes add up, but if you can just drain technique points from enemies, then you'll be fine.
Not to mention the fact that you only can carry so many of them, so once you're out, and now...
So best of luck to you.
Teleport back.
Yeah.
At least Newmans could at least very slowly regenerate it over time.
Oh yeah, humans were considered...
Sit around.
Humans were considered balanced, so they didn't really get anything special. Newman could stand around, and depending on how high their level is, their TP will automatically regenerate, but you do have to stand still, so you pay the price in boredom, I suppose. Or if it's one of the times when you don't need to pause the game and you can just walk away and you're safe, it's a good time to do it. And androids can't use spells, so in the original Dreamcast version, they could just see invisible mines. Traps.
They all got trap vision.
Yeah. In the original version, they had that, but that was it. That was their concession, and they had like pretty good stat growth. But in later versions, they gave them traps, which were they're kind of interesting because they do damage based on your level, or paralyze enemies, freeze them, depending on your level.
Or confuse them.
Yep.
It's a soloer's best friend.
Make enemies confused and they will attack each other, and early on when they do way more damage than you do, that's very useful.
Yeah.
Not to mention confusing enemies that can spew Miijhal everywhere so that they could one-shot their allies.
That never worked for me.
Aw.
Yeah, that's another thing, though. Like, most of Episode 1 enemies had a fairly high enough resistance to Miijhal that no one really would bother with it. You wouldn't really want to bother with it too much.
Yeah, that's what the dark resistance stat is for, by the way. It's a check to see whether you get instantly killed by the spell. If you don't, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Episode 2, on the other hand, a lot of the problem enemies there are almost trivialized with Miijhal or Hell.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the more busted specials, is the Hell special. That whole line of them. It starts off as like a nice novelty where, like, you press the special attack button and 50 times you miss, and then one time you hit them, the enemy dies instantly. Then you get up to the Hell, which is a pretty high percentage of working, which I think is higher if you're an android. Secretly, they don't tell you.
Yep.
And that will instantly kill enemies, and you can't do it super flagrantly with most weapon combinations. And if for weapons that hit multiple times or multiple targets, it's actually reduced. So you can't use like a shotgun or something and then just instantly kill a room full of people.
But then you get something like a Hell Beam.
Yeah. You get a long-range weapon which you can target enemies that are outside of the range which will actually activate them to attack you. And you can kill them instantly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kinda. They're so goddamn broken. Especially just, like, even early on, once you get mech guns, you are just kind of plowing through every room, and no one really gets a chance.
Yeah. Mech guns are very entertaining, though, because they fire 3 shots for every input you do, so 9.
Yep.
So if you can... They don't do a lot of damage, so if you get to, like, a higher difficulty, you can do 0 damage to enemies in this game and not phase them. It's extremely possible.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing with mech guns there would be is just you want to push your attack power high enough to be able to compensate for the lower attack power of the attack itself.
Yeah, but with a heavy attack, since it does 9 bullets, you can push enemies back pretty significantly.
Oh yeah.
Later on, you start finding weird weapons that are equipable by people who shouldn't normally be able to use said weapons. I think some of my other favorites were like there's like a saber. Granted, everyone could use sabers, but when you use its special attack, just shot out a fireball instead.
Oh, Lysian, yeah.
Yeah, it just uses full.
Yeah, and that one requires mental strength to equip, so androids can't use it.
Yeah.
But
Sealed J sword.
Okay, we'll get to the really ridiculous stuff in just a second, but oh yeah, there's the double saber which we mentioned, which is the Darth Maul double-ended sword, which is really neat. It does like 6 hits. It's a really interesting attack pattern. The dagger type weapons also do it, but the double saber's just better in literally every way.
I think it just has greater range.
Yeah.
And
also has like a better radius for targeting enemies because you don't really 100% manually aim in this game. It's a weird mix of the two. You can be inches off and not have it auto-aim, but you can also, like, you get a lock on an enemy and you'll stick to them pretty well. And the double saber has a really wide range for acquiring enemies, so you won't miss as much, and since you move a lot when you do the combo, you can actually avoid attacks from behind by just continuing to attack. So that's interesting. Also they added paired swords, like a set of 2 separate swords.
Yeah, twin swords.
Yeah.
They were.
Even though the sword type weapon refers to the blades that you use to hit groups of enemies. Whatever.
Yeah. I think it was just generally settled upon like twin swords because like the double saber equivalent of that set was just like Musashi, then Yamato, and then I forget what the red one was.
Yeah, the fire one. Wow, I can't remember whatever. I never saw anyone have it. Because it's kind of hard to get.
I know, right?
But yeah, I mean, we could talk about those for a long time.
One more, the rocket knuckle.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. You have like it's a twin machine gun,
but it just fires.
It's a single shot in the volley. But
you just punch things to death from right.
Yeah, it just shoots 2 giant fists.
Speaking of which, if you want to fight things with like the hand-to-hand moveset, which isn't really that good for a lot of people, but there are like weapons that make you do the hand-to-hand animations that have a lot of attack power and are not super hard to get. But that's actually what we're going to discuss now, because there's beating the bosses and stuff, but the main draw of Phantasy Star Online are the rare item drops. Here's the thing, they're not kidding when they say rare.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, you killed one guy and he didn't drop it. This is so rare. It's, you killed hundreds of these guys, thousands, and in version 1 and 2 of the game on the Dreamcast, tens of thousands of enemies, and you've never gotten it. You've never seen it. Does it even exist? Who knows?
In normal mode forest, getting a boomer claw or boomer's right arm or whatever it was I think 1 in 1,024 chance, and that was considered a pretty good chance.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
It was really bad.
Like, in most situations, the rare drop rate was like in 700s at least. And then even in version 2 in Blueburst, it was like 25,000 for things like the Sealed J Sword.
Yeah, which is then not even that great, and you have to kill a ton of enemies with it to make it into the Sumikiri J Sword, which is actually good.
Yeah, I think it was like 100,000 enemies you had to kill.
Yeah, so you might as well look for another rare weapon while you're using it.
Yeah, basically.
And you might not find it.
Oh, and Gold and Mila?
Oh, yeah. Because there are a lot of cool things, like there's some weapons where you have one of the rare ones, and then another one, and there'll be like a use option in the item menu, and it will turn them into a new, like, paired weapon, which is really cool, but one weapon might be sort of difficult to get, and one will be impossible.
Yeah.
Gold had a couple drops for some section IDs, but like Mila was basically only available to one section ID.
Oh, we didn't explain that, and we should.
Yeah.
Section ID.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which plays into the drop rates, so this is actually a good time to bring it up. So when you create your character, after you finish creating them, it'll say section ID, and it'll have a different color theme name, like Redria or Purple Num. You think, oh, that's interesting, whatever that means. But what you've actually done is determine what kind of items will drop for you most often, and what kind of items you can get at all in some cases. And it's based on your name.
Thankfully, it counts spaces and like caps locks and things, so you can manipulate that if you don't want to actually change your name.
Yeah, but then you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah.
It's such a bizarre design decision. Like, I guess it was made so that you'd have like a communal thing going, but it goes from a little bizarre to manipulate in the early versions to in Blueburst, it's also dependent on your character class, so the same name will give you a different ID for a different character class.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can see the reasoning behind it, like, there's incentive to team up with someone on a different section ID so you can both get things in each other's drop table by one.
Like, I played this game solo for a long time, but I eventually started looking up guides. But if you are playing this solo, like, look up a guide and get a section ID for what you actually want to get. Like, it's not really spoilers in this case, because you can look up something you want and still potentially not see it in the game because of the drop rates.
Yeah. I think a good indicator is really that there is a log somewhere of what tendencies of standard items a class will drop.
Yeah. I mean, each one is like Purple Limb gets mech guns, and Widow gets slicers, which are like, they look like boomerangs, but they're just like ranged multi-hit weapons for hunters.
Yellow Bows gets bling.
Yeah. Yellow Bows gets a lot of money, which sounds great early in the game, and then later in the game, when you can just have money by selling 3 armors you found on the ground. Not so much.
Yeah, those will easily be better than any amount of corn you find.
Yeah, that's... Masada, which is the money in this game, looks like sharp corn.
Mm-hmm. And then Pink Hole has a better chance for higher end tech discs, which was how Technics leveled up in that game. I guess they just made it based on the drop rate, so you had to get a better level to drop of your attack.
Yeah, this is sort of the soft, like, most rare item in the game is the max level for a technique is 30. And finding level 30 technique discs is extremely rare, because they don't even appear from a certain enemy. They're 100% random.
Mm-hmm.
Even boxes.
Yep. You can just break open a box in Ultimate and be like, oh, a level 30 technique disc. But I'm saying that, but that's probably not going to happen to you. I don't know anyone it's happened to.
Like, you enter Forest 1 on Ultimate in one of the few rooms that is safe and has some boxes right there. You open it up and bam, level 30 Miijhal.
Of course, most characters could not equip level 30 Miijhal
Nope.
because they, like, non-force classes had level caps on their spells.
Yeah. Androids can't use them at all, but if you're not a force, then it limits the rate to which you can even use. And some spells you just can't use at all again.
Yeah, and it had a lot of influence in, like, what classes generally were better than others. Like, you're better off playing as Hunural than a Hunuum, Humar, because they had a higher level of shift and deband. So they were just better, basically.
Yeah, since shift and deband are the buff spells for attack and defense, and those boosts can end up bigger than just a class with a higher straight-up attack power. Oh, that's right. Some items are gender-specific. So if you want the second level double saber, which is red, and it's called Stag Cutlery, you can only equip it if you're a man. And the description just says a popular double saber among men. I don't know why women can't equip it. There's literally no reason given, but you just can't. But if you're a girl, you can equip the Angel Harp, which is a rifle, so that's actually kind of nice for if you're a hunter or something. But little angel feathers fly off of it when you shoot. For women. Let's discuss quests really quick, because there's the main storyline, which you experience by just going into the dungeons, and in later versions you do specific missions through the government, the principal character. And these are little mini-stories, and some of them actually do have like a running through line throughout the different quests. And they have different setups, someone will talk to you, and the town area will, almost for all of them, have some new NPCs you can talk to, which is a nice detail. Though they say things like, oh, Rakden is greedy, but his son, ironically, is not greedy, which isn't irony! That's just like, funny. It's not really ironic. No one's like, oh, Rakden's gonna have the greediest son ever.
Real estate guy.
And then the maps aren't randomized in that case, because there's a few different layouts when you just normally go in. But they'll have a set pattern, there'll be some specific thing for you to do. I mean, it's still the same standard gameplay, you kill stuff. But there's dialogue and story portions. And the whole thing about stuff just for ladies reminded me of a really bad quest in the caves, where someone's like, oh, I'm about to get married. But I want to look good for my husband, but I use too many healing items, and they make me fat.
Yep, and they have the NPC be, like, max out in weight.
And
It's
like, I guess it shows off the range of the character creator, because, yeah, she looks significantly different when you finish the quest, and, like, immediately she's skinny, which is very strange, but... I use too many healing items when I'm sliced up by monsters doing my job as a hunter, and that's no good for my husband. He'll never marry someone like me. Like, and how are they even making you gain weight? Robots eat them to heal themselves. Do they eat fats too or something? Shouldn't they be closing up your grievous slashing and poison wounds?
also, you're generally, running around a lot and killing things. That's exhausting work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably just sweat it off, right?
Also, if that's such a problem, she's not an android. Just use healing magic, you moron. Does that make you gain weight too? I don't know. I thought the regular healing items just healed you. I don't know. Maybe Resta makes you gain weight.
Yep.
No, that's what happens when someone hacks the game so that Resta kills everyone in the room. It just makes you die of cholesterol, like a clogged artery.
Yeah.
From just eating too much.
You die of bonitis.
So, that said, the hook of keeping her health high so that she doesn't heal is an okay idea. It's kind of, and different quests have stuff like that. Also, if your teammate dies, then you fail the quest, 100% of the time. There are other quests that are much better, and I mean, some of them are just supposed to be funny, like, oh, these sisters that baked cakes are gone, and then you find out they're in the caves because the temperature is perfect to make cakes in the caves.
And the humidity.
Ew.
I will say I hate every single quest that had you have to run through the entirety of the caves.
Yeah.
Which were multiple of them.
Yeah. Surprisingly many. Sometimes they, thankfully started you at caves 2 or 3, but not generally.
We were talking about character creation too. And another thing about the different, at least the different force classes, is that each one, pretty sure they never actually tell you this at creation, but each one boosts a different set of texts themselves. Both of the human forces have double range on Shift and D-Band.
Yeah, the support ones.
The Fomar has just all the Gi spells and grants deal 1.3 times damage.
Yeah. The inaugural,
the female Newman.
Yeah, all her basic spells do more damage, and then also when she casts Miijhal or Megid or whatever, it pierces through enemies, which you need a specific rare weapon to do with other characters, so in other words, you can't do it with other characters.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty much.
Foy, Zande, Barda, and Miijhal 1.3 times damage.
Well, that's sure helpful.
1.3 times success rate on Miijhal.
Yeah. And then the foe Noom has raw spells boosted, which are the biggest ones.
And Gi spells, apparently.
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing I guess we didn't explain about magic, is there's the elemental versions, which are fire, ice, lightning, and then they have a second level, which has GI before it, so Gizande, Gifoy, or whatever. And then there's raw level, which are the area effect ones that also do a ton of damage. And then they have healing, they have one that cures negative status effects. Holy Forces can use Reverser, which brings people back to life. There's a Ryuker, which creates a teleport. Yeah.
Telepipe.
Telepipes are the item used to get back to town instantly, which you can use pretty much everywhere, which is nice. But if you don't want to carry those around...
Yeah, everyone... even Diablo had those.
Yeah, Town Portal. This is that.
Scrolls.
Yeah. But if you have Ryuker, then you can just use that if you have enough technique points. So that's one advantage of the Newman, is if you completely drain your TP, you can just stand around for a bit and regenerate.
Get enough to Ryuker your way back up to get stock up on tri-fluids.
Yeah.
We'll just hit the clinic.
There's Shifto, which increases your attack power, D-Band, which raises your defense. This might just be psychological, but I feel like having Shift also increases your success, your hit rate for stuff.
Your accuracy? Yeah, I'm pretty sure Shift also affected accuracy, and D-Band also affected evasion.
Fair enough.
While we were talking about character creation, I remembered one little detail. In the versions before, I think it was the Dreamcast version 1 and 2, there were button combinations you could input while you were in the character creator to unlock new costume colors.
You had to type in a certain name in that name,
yeah.
and then it would change the colors. But luckily, then you could change your name after and still use the custom colors.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a strange thing to include.
It was a nice little touch.
Later versions, they just had it unlocked.
Yeah. They also added tons of new colors.
Yeah. Which are pretty interesting. Some of them aren't just different colors, but like they're different outfits.
Yeah.
And, I mean, also when we mentioned gender-specific equipment, the male characters have different animations for using certain weapons than female characters, and even then, there's some that are unique. So, like, sabers, male characters have a faster animation, but with katanas, which are pretty much the same but have different animations, female characters are faster. And if you're the Hukasil, which is the female android hunter, you have a different double saber animation and like daggers and hand to hand, which is like an interesting touch.
Yes.
But again, if you don't know about it, you'll miss out.
I remember Hugh Cassiel's hand to hand was actually, instead of punching things, they would do like a roundhouse kick.
Yeah.
This was kind of a neat thing.
Also, the best one for the Raymar, which is the female human ranger, which they added in the GameCube and Xbox versions. She fires handguns gangster style.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's like turned to sideways. Fomars with a claw would backhand enemies.
That's nice. Claws are otherwise not very useful.
Yeah.
Well,
The male Newman forces would, the only male Newmans. Their walking, not running animation with canes had them use it actually as a walking implement.
Yeah, because they had that like pimp style going
Oh
on.
yeah, photos look
Yeah,
like
they
pimps.
did.
So like all of them, you either look like Zelda Wizard Boy or a pimp.
Yep.
Is the style.
They had those like ridiculous platform heels that were like half the size of their legs.
Yeah, unfortunately, like the fish aquarium shoes from I'm Gonna Get You Suck On It in there, but the technology didn't exist yet. And yeah, most other characters, like the other forces, just have some variation of robes. The hunters have, military techno garb. The Raymar, again, in addition to firing handguns sideways, which is awesome, she gets some cool berets in some of her color combinations.
Yeah.
Or like their hairstyles, actually. You can set that separate. And the hunters are, again, not that exciting, though the Hukasil kind of looks like a ninja. But the inaugural, that's the female Newman hunter, she has like punk styles. Which...
yeah, she was very 80s.
Yeah. The entire game is like the future from the perspective of someone from like the 1970s or 80s.
Yeah. Very interesting
Yeah.
retro future look. Not a ton of buttons on panels, though. Decent amount, but not like the Death Star level. Or maybe they can, and the textures are just really muddy and old because it came out on the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
Love it.
There were a lot of problems with the game. I've brought up things like the third form of Darkball just being total nonsense. Just the only way to not die was to have enough health, which meant you had to be high enough level, and for different classes, they had different health. So some characters would, at the same level, would just be totally screwed in the boss fight. It's terrible.
It's weird between the different versions, because I feel on the Dreamcast when I got to that boss... Now, my brother and I also had a Game Shark already, so maybe we cheated before that point, before we experienced it. But I felt like there were points, like, you could go back to the forest sooner upon leveling and, like, be killing things in one hit on the original version. And they sort of eased off the power curve, because version 2 on the Dreamcast and upwards, the max level was 100, or 200.